So our first session here, as you can see, turning planning into progress, capital and operational insights for transit leaders. Our presenters today are Juanita Carver and William Maynard. Juanita has over 2 decades of public and private sector financial experience, leadership experience with expertise in municipal budgeting, capital improvement planning, and strategic financial modeling. As the assistant public transit director for the city, she led as the deputy IT director for the city, she led citywide initiatives in cost allocation, rate setting, and long-range IT forecasting. And as assistant public transit director for the agency, she oversees the teams managing billions of dollars from dedicated taxes, grants, and special revenue funds. William Maynard is a seasoned financial professional with over 4 decades of experience in government finance, budgeting, and accounting. His career spans both military and civilian sectors, beginning in the United States Air Force, where he served for 20 years in various financial management roles across the globe. Thank you for your service, including Japan, Spain, Korea, and the United Kingdom. Rising to the rank of Master Sergeant, he led leadership positions such as Deputy Financial Services Officer and Senior Financial Analyst, managing multi-million-dollar budgets and implementing innovative financial systems. Following his military service, Bill transitioned to municipal government, where he served the city of Phoenix in progressively senior roles. His work includes developing cost models for citywide capital projects, leading teams of fiscal professionals, and working to implement financial systems, both large systems and small niche products, and of course, our Synario platform. So without further ado, Juanita and Bill, this show is yours. Take it away.
Thank you so much, and we appreciate the opportunity to be here. So again, thank you for having us. We're really excited. We are fairly new users of the Synario platform. Prior to that, we worked with PFM on a model that was Excel based. So using Synario has been really an interesting experience for us. Both Bill and I, as you mentioned, came from IT, so we're used to kind of IT planning. We did a lot of modeling through Gartner platform kind of thing, and it's just been really interesting to us because those are very fixed. You have to fit your model into, how they've built the model for the industry, which is great, and it worked for IT planning. But it's just really interesting to see a model that we can make work for us. And so I'm going to quickly go over kind of who we are and what we do, and then Bill will kind of walk through some of the ways that we're using the model to help us to with our mission, which is public transit for Phoenix. So quick overview of Phoenix. City of Phoenix is the capital city of Arizona, and that is actually important for us for financial planning because that makes our state legislation our stakeholder in our transit. So they care about where we put our light rail trains and things like that. So that has been an interesting relationship there. We are the 5th largest city in the US, and we have 1.6 million residents, but we're also large land-wise. So we have 4,850 miles of public streets that we have transit working on. So we're nowhere close to like a New York, but we have a lot of those same sort of issues. So we're probably pretty similar to most transit agencies in a mid-sized city with a few different things. So the kind of things that we have to deal with are probably like most agencies where everyone lives are dealing with. We are a council manager form of government, which I mentioned because financial stability and especially when we're talking about large capital projects, the confidence that we can manage those kind of projects and do the kind of strategic planning that's needed is important. And we are in an organization that has that professional staff. We have very strong leadership with financial knowledge. So we've been fortunate, and that has led to we do have a pretty good bond rating that has allowed us to use debt as a tool. And so both in our initial PFM model and in the Synario, debt is something that we can look at as one of the tools in our toolbox for how we manage such a large transit program. The other thing is we are the hottest city in the US. And even though I'm not sure that entirely makes its way into our financial planning, it kind of does because it affects everything that we do. We have in the city an office of heat that manages heat, but we're kind of that test bed for as other cities are starting to get hotter. We've been there. Our infrastructure, our service, it's all built around heat, and it affects transit. It affects what kind of bus can we buy. We're moving towards different propulsion, but will batteries really work the way of, you know, a CNG bus or something like that? So it comes to play. So regionally, our transit, we are the valley, you might hear the Valley of the Sun or the Valley. Phoenix is the largest, but there's a lot of cities that have transit needs, but often very different transit needs. Phoenix is more dense. We have more of a population, whereas some of the growing valley cities they're more suburban. They have a lot of single family sort of suburban, so different transit needs. We have fixed route, which is regular buses, commuter buses, circulators. We have paratransit, van pools, and then we are starting to work in microtransit. We have some of the valley cities that are more you know, less urban, they have been doing some microtransit, and we have recently got a grant. So that's a new thing that we'll be doing, and we'll have to, that's something where this model will be helpful, because we'll be able to go into it being able to start tracking from day one, and then be able to really see what it looks like financially for a future transit service, if that's something that policy wise we want to continue doing. We have light rail, and then another area that's really new for us is bus rapid transit. We are just in the beginning stages of having designed the first route for bus rapid transit, and it's another example of where this kind of thing comes into play with a financial model. Less than 4 years ago, a study showed that it shouldn't cost that much, and we should not need to federalize it. As we get into it, we're discovering that's not at all the case, and it is an expensive to do it right, to do it in a way that really is bus rapid transit and not just a bus. It takes a lot. And so with this model that we've had, we've been able to look at what what does it look like when you have something that we thought was going to be this big and now it's really this big. And so that's been really useful. We partner in the region. We are a part of the Valley Metro umbrella for regional transit, and they have the RPTA for bus and Valley Metro rail. And we are literally in each other's pockets all the time, from policy making um, to back and forth money. Sometimes it feels insane. We send them money, they send us money. We send them, you know, it is a constant back and forth with that kind of partner. So fortunately, they're very reliable, very easy to work with partners. So we've been very lucky in that way. Also, our other partners, Maricopa Association of Governments, or MAG, who is our MPO and does the regional transportation planning. And so we have to ensure that our plans work with their plans. And then obviously the Federal Transit Administration, who we work with. And I'll just quickly go over this slide. This is what our organization looks like as the designated recipient. So we are actually the recipients of the federal funding that comes to the Valley. So, and then we have the technology that that the region uses. So those are some of the areas that we as a city have, and then Valley Metro, who is our partner, everything is under those. So a rider wouldn't need to know that it's a Phoenix bus, or if they've left Phoenix, area into Tempe, it's all Valley Metro. They do the marketing, the logo. People go to their website for the planning and for their tickets, and so it's pretty seamless. But on the back end, it's anything but seamless, and that's why having tools to manage what is really actually in the back end very complex, and we just really are presenting a very simplified version of what transit in the Valley looks like. It's really, really useful to have these sort of strategic planning tools. So just again, regionally, we're not huge, but we're not small. We're in that definite middle range. We have all of the sorts of transport, light rail, fixed rail. Tempe has a streetcar that the university relies on heavily. We have regional paratransit and ride choice and van pool. Again, a rider wouldn't know who they're going to. They would just know that they're getting that service. Phoenix Public Transit itself, we are the largest member of Valley Metro. Like I mentioned, we're the designated recipient. And we also have some programs that we provide for, like the 5310 grant program, which provides vehicles to organizations that assist elderly and disabled to get to important appointments and events. We manage that program. We have our own police transit unit, which is just another level of complexity. When we have everything from billion-dollar grants for CIG projects down to grants that are buying dog toys for the Phoenix Transit Unit's canine officers. And then we also lease facilities, which is yet another source of funding. Again, 55% of the region is Phoenix service, 65% of the ridership, because we are more of the dense area in the valley. So we have even more ridership than our square miles. We have 48 routes and 642 vehicles. What I want to mention here is those types of vehicles. That's one of the things that this model has been really important to us for is we have traditionally been CNG, which is compressed natural gas, and biodiesel. Our council wants us to we have committed to a zero emission bus fleet by 2040, which when we planned that maybe 5 years ago, we still had biodiesel at that time. Biodiesel's now gone away for us. But our plan was very much hydrogen, fuel cell, and hybrid and battery electric, knowing that battery electric in our heat probably will have some constraints. So one CNG bus will not equal one battery electric. So we have to look at what does that look like then financially if we have to buy more buses than we currently do. And then hydrogen changed there was going to be hydrogen providers in the valley. They didn't come because of some of the uncertainty in the market for alternative vehicle or alternative fuel vehicles. And so now we're having to rethink that. And so having this kind of model where we can rethink that, like what would it look like if we bought all hybrid? What would it look like if we bought all battery electric? So we can use that, this model to kind of project what that would look like for us. Again, just overview light rail, we have 35 miles, 3 cities. We just became a 2-line system. We used to go from the north out east, and then this January we opened up going to South Phoenix. So now we have one route that goes north and south and one that goes east west. And for this program, for our light rail program, we've gotten almost $1 billion in total grants, most of them being large capital investment grants. But we also have been really successful in our transit-oriented development grants from the FTA that provide for funding to have transit sort of development, transit housing, or low-cost housing near transit, that kind of thing. So again, those funding sources are great. It's great that we have as many. We have FHWA, we have, TOD grants, we have all over the place. So that's great. But the other side is it is so difficult on the back end in order to manage all those funds. And so that's where this kind of system and the kind of strategic planning that we've been doing has been very helpful. So our sources of fund, we have a tax, T2050. I'll go over that a little more in a second. The county has its own excise tax for transportation, and a large portion of that is transit. We have federal formula, discretionary, competitive grants. We have federal earmarks, we have local funds, and then we have fair revenue. Some of the constraints that we have on this funding, every source of funding you see there has constraints. And so building a model and working through that is definitely a challenge. The T2050 has constraints because when we went with that to the voters, we had actual maps on the ballot and we told them what we were planning to do, and they overwhelmingly supported it. And so we have, as we plan strategically, we have to keep that in mind, that that's what we told them we were going to do with this money, and so we have to make it work, and so we have to work the funding to be able to get there. The county has even more constraints on their funding because it required enabling legislation from the state, and they put a lot of parameters around it. So none of that money can be used for light rail expansion. And some of it can be used for operations and maintenance, but only up to 0.5%, and they're going to audit us on our fare recovery and on constraints on that funding source. So we have to be able to track what is that funding being used for, so that we're sure it's not being used in any of the prohibited areas, but also that we can still maximize it to do the things that we need to do. Some other constraints we also have to align to our region-wide transportation plan, and that is managed by MAG as our MPO. And then obviously federal money comes with its own constraints. So managing that and managing the FTA funding. I won't go into this in great detail, but I just wanted to show what our T2050, what our voters did approve for us back in 2015. And this is the T2050 is our tax that the city of Phoenix is managing. So this is, in the end, our entire model goes through all of the funding sources, and this is what we manage to. The T2050 fund, where are we on the tax that our residents gave to us to provide the transit? And we use that tax both to provide transit directly, but also to be able to get those federal grants and have the local share for federal grants, and to be able to pay debt service so that we can do bigger things with that funding. So overall, a $3.5 billion program that the voters approved for us. And we update them annually on where we are. We're close to the 10th year right now. And what they ask for, and you can see it there, they want high capacity transit, and they want our bus to be more frequent and more service. So those are our goals as we work through our strategic planning. Some of our advantages that we have fantastic partnerships. We have Valley Metro, who is a fantastic partner with us in the detail as far and as well as the policy, as well as our relationship with the FTA and with MAG. We also have strong resident support. They voted both for our tax, and then just last year the county had to go back for their tax, and there was a lot of negative press about it. It was a challenge, and still at almost 60% for a tax voted for it. And then also we've been really successful with those grant programs, so we're very fortunate on that. Our challenges, though, are political support for transit isn't necessarily there. We are culturally a very car-driven environment, and so while the residents keep telling us and voting at the booth and saying we want transit, sometimes that does not make it to the political leadership. And so we do have that challenge. It is what it is, and we just have to work with it, and we have to be ready, which is why this model I've used multiple times when something comes down where there's some change to a major project because of something at the state level. We can do that. I can give leadership. Well, what will that look like if this route or this project has to change? And I can give them those answers, and I can give those answers in a relatively short period of time, which is critical as we're making those decisions. Escalating costs all around. I think everyone is dealing with that. We've done well in our tax because inflation is good for taxes, but it's also been hard for us because even with Buy America, the tariffs are hitting our manufacturers, and labor costs are much higher. So escalating costs, obviously a problem that we use this model to try to address. Our program with the feds is uncertain. We don't know what's going to happen with the CIG. We have CIG projects in the pipeline, and we don't know what that's going to look like. So one of the things we model isn't necessarily just what happens if they stop funding large grant programs, but at what level is it not matter? At what point does it, if they only are going to provide a 30% match, is it still doable? And that we've been able to use the model to say, actually, no, it's not. It would have to be something higher. So that kind of ability to have that kind of certainty has been very helpful. And then the complexity and interconnectivity of our funding, as I mentioned. How we plan for progress. So we manage the funding like most organizations would in 3 ways: our capital program, our 5-year program. So these are basically, every one of these are things that we have or can use the model to look at. The CIG program model, we have our CIG mimics how the feds pay out our money, and we have that so that if there's changes to that, we can model those. Our bus replacement model, and then on the operations side, our ridership changes, our fare changes. We haven't updated, or we haven't increased our fare in ages, but if we did, what would that look like? What would it look like if they wanted free fares, if there was a drive that way? We can look and see what would that do? How would that impact us in the model? And then security costs now, for logical reasons, we're needing to increase security for our light rail and in our bus systems, but also that's a huge focus of the administration. So as we put more costs to that or funding to that, someone is losing out. So we can take a look at that and see what does it look like as we increase security costs. And then we can look at our revenue. How close are we on our tax projections? Timing of CIG. CIG grants used to take years to be able to draw down those federal funds. It's gotten faster. If that continues, that makes a difference for us. Do we have to sell debt if we can get that money within 2 years? Probably not. But if it extends, then we have to look at that. So all of those things are, and then keeping the sources of funding separate, are all things that we plan for, we think about, and we put into this model as well as our other modeling or other financial tools that we have. And so with that, like I think I mentioned earlier, we used to use an Excel that PFM had created for us. And it is honestly a thing of beauty. It is an amazing Excel spreadsheet, and it's been super useful. But it does allow for a lot more human error when you have people going in and updating and entering data. And so for us, the opportunity to move to the Synario product and have that the same thoroughness, the same complexity, but a little more agile so that we're not having to replicate it every time we make a single change and try to remember how did we replicate it, but also just the taking out as much of a human input element that we had with the Excel model. So with that, I am going to let Bill start sharing and kind of walk through the areas where we have been using the model, just for the key areas. So I think he's going to talk about, as he brings it up, looking at our overall cash flow over the 50-year period, or until 2050, looking at our bus and rail capital models, and then also our fare revenue models. So Bill, take it away.
Thank you, Juanita. Yeah, so what we have here, there's a lot of information that goes into the Synario program. And we put some things in here to show us going into a negative fund balance. But basically, we have a dashboard here that will have individual reports on, and there's many reports. We're just going to show an example of 4 of the reports. And then those reports can be, visualized by graphs right next door. So I'm just going to pop this one out. This is our transit cash flow. So it's everything that's in our program. You'll see here that we have all our funding sources, like when he was talking about sales tax. There's operating sources for fare revenue, a lot of the grant programs that we get, and just everything that we can forecast or we know is coming in will be put into the model here. We'll have actuals for 25, 26 is our budget, and then we have alternatives for the out years on how we want to forecast those. And I'll get into those up here under the scenarios, because you can change those forecasts with different scenarios. And so at a click of a button, you can see what that's going to do to your cash flow. So we consolidate all those sources, and then we input all of our usage of those funds. You'll see basically with our program, we broke it down into 2 areas. We break everything out between rail and bus, and then of course operating and capital. Those are our 4 major areas and where we have expenditures. And then we'll have our fund balance that carries forward. It'll calculate that. We have a reserve fund balance that we'll add in to ensure we don't go past a certain point. And then as we go along, you'll see we go into a negative fund balance. And we force some things in here to show that on the model so we could show how that would look if you start to go into a negative fund balance. And what's that going to do is tell management that, we're either going to have to sell debt or we're going to have to cut capital or operating programs in order to stay into a positive balance for all the funds that we receive. So with that said, I'm just going to close this here. So the different scenarios here, we have our base model, which basically we will put in growth rates. For example, like we'll forecast that sales tax will grow at 3%. Our federal grants, we can forecast of a percentage or that they will grow. And then we can have alternative growth rates here. So if they're going to go down, you can see it instantly changes the chart, which is nice. Again, these, we're going to have higher growth rates here for revenue sources. And then over here, they're going to be less. And it's nice that you'll be able to do that. I want to show you some easier examples. We're still in the process of creating scenarios, but those are the two that we currently have. And all of these little blocks here, you can have multiple scenarios that are created in the background. So you'll be able to show management different alternatives to the cash flow and operating. When we get down, capital is our largest expense, if you will, and it's a large source of revenue as well. So what we've done here, you'll see the capital expenditures. Basically, again, it's bus, which is primarily fleet replacement of the buses. And then we have our rail, which there's several projects on the light rail program, like when we want to extend the rail. And over here, go back. So we'll have the base. This is everything we currently want in the plan that we forecast we're going to do in the future. When we set up capital plan or projects, we will input them. Again, it's in a table in the background, but basically we will estimate the number of years that project is going to take. A federal funding source. Usually they pay a percentage of the rail projects for new start type grants. So when we can put those in the model, and we put a start date in the model, which is helpful. And then if that project is getting delayed, or we can set up scenarios what will be delayed, 2 years, 3 years based on funding availability, it will automatically calculate the inflation of those dollars as well by pushing it forward into the out years, which is very, very handy for us. And what I've done here is, so I've set up a scenario where we have two very large projects. It's capital extension, where they're going to extend the light rail from the downtown area to the Capitol building. And then we also have what Juanita was talking about, the bus rapid transit, building out those platforms to develop the bus rapid transit, or BRT as we call it. But if we're going to go into, again, we got negative fund balance here. It's like, hey, we really can't afford to do all this at once. So basically we could show management, we can turn that off. Pausing those programs and what the difference will be. You're not seeing a change here because this is the bus, but down here is I should have did it down here for you guys. So there's if we did everything, and then if we did an alternative or pausing those projects, we have more fund availability, the costs come down. We have ridership because a lot of our revenue is based on ridership, right? So there's a growth on ridership, or is ridership going to decrease? Obviously, during the pandemic, lots of revenue came down, right? People weren't riding the bus. So it was a good way to model and a quick way to model and forecast the future of ridership and what that does to our revenue streams. And then you have a fare box recovery ratio, which I need to talk more about that. But what we want to do is just show how quickly here, all the charts can be put together onto a dashboard and really visualize it for management on what different alternatives, what effect it would have on our program.
Yeah, and on that fare box recovery, that is what I mentioned earlier, that one of the constraints for the enabling legislature for the county tax was that they would audit us on the entire region on our fare recovery as a region. So we can look and see what is our fare box recovery, which is basically how much does the service cost you, and then what percentage of that are you getting back from fares? And that's what the legislators care about. They want to make sure that transit is never it is a public infrastructure. It is not going to be something that is paid for solely by fares, but they want it to be a certain amount. So we can use this to be sure that we're staying within that. Because if we go outside of that and they do an audit, those cities that have gone beyond that are going to have to pay that out of their local tax, and so, or I mean their local funds. So we don't want that to happen. So we can stay ahead of that by planning strategically and saying, uh-oh, here's an issue, what do we do? And so it's just one of the many areas that we can keep our it can build into, fully to our full model so that we can manage that cash flow. But it also is something that we can use for those one-off things that we just happen to know we're going to get audited on. So we really do need to keep an eye on that. So that's what that was. So I think, Bill, did you have anything else that you wanted to go over? And just wanted to again repeat that these are fake numbers. We're not going into the red anytime soon, and we're not looking to do any major changes to our projects in that way. So I just want to put that caveat out there.
Yeah, thank you.
But with that, I think we're just open for questions.
All right, wonderful. Yeah, thank you, everyone. Well, Q&A section is open, so I did drop in a comment there. If anyone would like to drop in a question there, feel free. You just have to click the Q&A tab in your Teams window and drop them in from there. And maybe to kind of kick things off here, I have a couple of questions of my own that I'd love to kind of dig in on. And of course, first of all, Juanita and Bill, thank you very much for your overview here. It's nice to see how well you're picking up the system. With the pretty quick turnaround time here, right? Like you said, you're relatively new to the system, so we're really excited to see where this takes you. No particular order here, but Bill, you outlined kind of the need to delay and potentially inflate large-scale projects in the tool, effectively as a way to understand, where there are going to be larger or smaller needs, right, for sources of funds. I'm curious if you can talk to us a little bit about what impact that ability has, or that level of prioritization has, when managing expectations with leadership, right? That's a comprehensive exercise, I'm sure, and it really leads to potentially a reallocation of funds for different needs in kind of the short term. So what does that mean for leadership for you all?
Yeah, and I'm gonna have Juanita chime in too. And some I forgot to mention, so as we go into the whole area, for example, delaying that project, it's going to cost us millions of dollars or more, let's just say, for an example, due to inflation, if it was pushed 3 years out. So, just telling that to management, it does help them make a decision on which projects would be more beneficial to push out. But we also have this button of debt test, right? So what this button is telling us here is it'll show us that if we sell debt, this is what our fund balance becomes now. So it also gives them that decision making in order to decide if we want to go ahead and sell debt to fund some of these projects. And Juanita, if you want to talk any more, because you're more involved with the management.
Sure. So yeah, I think that that kind of gets back to your earlier comment about the difference between the back end and the strategic. And we like to use this for a lot of things, including back end stuff that never goes anywhere beyond our department planning. But what you've identified is probably the key area of what management cares about. Like, they care about those big projects, the ones the community knows about, the ones that they're engaged with. And so, and again, prior to this, we have been using the Excel model that from PFM. So that is probably the number one thing that we get asked to model is what happens if we didn't do this project. What happens, we planned this in 2015, things changed. One of the things that they thought back then was, hey, this will be useful to get to the mall in this, like, nobody goes to the mall anymore, and that was a short turnaround. So now they look at, like, okay, does that still make sense as an area we want to go to? So that is what you've hit on, is probably the key management strategic question that we have to model, is what happens if we push out projects, or what happens if we change what our priority projects were going to be.
Yeah, thank you both. That's certainly helpful. I'm curious, when you're communicating this type of information, are there particular, obviously, other than looking at bottom line metrics and some of the fund balance outputs that you've seen here that you're using, are there particular key performance indicators or ratios or metrics that your leadership typically cares about that you found to be kind of a standard in the industry for communicating these types of results?
I don't know that about a standard in the industry, except for things like fare box recovery ratio. So those kind of things, ridership data, that those kind of things. Yes, we put those out. Valley Metro will put those out for us for the whole region on their website, showing those things that we can look at in tools like this. But what we've also been finding is that for us, it's that fund balance. So presenting what it looks like for the remaining years of this tax. When will we go red, in some areas and need debt? And then what is that ending fund balance? That's been the key metric that they can look at, because that can tell us whether something's a go or a no-go.
Yeah, that makes sense. Obviously, fund balance is a big element of it, as we can see here. And as you stated, right, coming from another process where this was kind of established, a big element of picking up the tool and being able to use this to generate a lot of these outputs, I'm sure is speed and efficiency. I'm curious, and we've heard this before, the nature of how financial planning works isn't necessarily that a system will just speed up the process, right? Sometimes decision making is an iterative exercise, but the goal with going through an implementation like this is to shift the conversation from validation to actual analysis and decision making. If you can, talk to me a little bit about your experience there, right? You're familiar with a lot of these outputs. You have to communicate these results. Have you noticed that type of a shift? And what does that look like for you?
So, and I'll let Bill jump in if he's wants to add anything, but I have definitely noticed that in as I've become more familiar with this model. Initially, it was I would wait to see what they would ask. Like, they want to know what would it look like if we did this, and then I'd run that model. More recently, what we've been doing is we see some potential changes coming up, and so I obviously, we're providing it to manage for them to make a decision, but this has allowed us to see areas where we could find ourselves in a little trouble if we did that. The model may say it's doable if we just look at the cash flow, but what does that mean as far as debt? What does that mean as far as, is it reasonable to have that kind of to do some of these things? So rather than just rely on answering their questions, more recently I've provided our management with here's like 5 different things, and you should probably think about these things, and I could support it with the data to say, you can caution them more about things that may be coming, that if they ask the questions, they don't think to ask those questions because they're not seeing this model, they're not seeing how it all interworks. So to be able to provide them that, as opposed to just waiting and answering their questions, has been really helpful.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. Who are the typical stakeholders that you present to? So obviously management is a big element here. Do you have any other internal or even external stakeholders that you're hoping to leverage these types of insights with?
So for us, our stakeholders, when we say management, it's our city executives, and then I've used these models, that still the old model, but to present to the mayor, to make decisions. So there's that kind of management. But then our partners, Valley Metro, is also they have a lot of our same problems, and then they have their own problems working with all of the different cities and stuff, and they have to be able to model that. So so we do share our model with Valley Metro, and as they've been working as well in a much earlier stage of Synario, are talking with us about like what we've done, and they, they're not our end, but they are our partner in this. So definitely sharing information with them from our model.
Gotcha. And I'm sure as you're working through communicating and presenting information to various groups here at various levels and for different purposes, the way in which you're communicating those results, I'm sure plays a part in this as well. And I'm really referring to the visual side of this, right? The level of detail that you're going into, the types of outputs that you're showing. In my experience, people digest information in different ways, depending on their function. So given the fact that you have quite a complex and comprehensive organization, can you speak to the level of detail that you have found to be manageable for this type of long-term planning for your particular needs? What does that look like for you all?
So I would say you're 100% right. Like, we don't show the same things to everyone. So what we know in the back end, the level of detail we get into, isn't something that we shared. And so we haven't used them yet because, like you mentioned earlier, we're still, we're transitioning from our PFM Excel model to this. And one of the things is I used to have to like go in and we'd have to take the model and then turn it into a graph, in a PowerPoint, that kind of thing. What Bill just showed when he did that debt test, where you could show this live and then they can see here's what it looks like and then here's what it looks like then, that, like you said, people view things differently. Those charts that's one of the key things that I'm excited for this, because I know that that's how they'll think. I know that they don't want to hear me just telling them things that, or just, a static, not the prettiest thing you've ever seen thing that I created in PowerPoint, versus be able to show them real time that change by just hitting the button and then having them see, oh, okay, I see what that's going to look like. That I think is probably, for me, one of the things that I really am looking forward to using with this tool.
Yeah, thank you for that. And it really sounds like you're kind of highlighting a potential, I'll call it a pain point, in being able to take these types of numbers, these types of analyses, and turn them into kind of actionable next steps, right? And that's oftentimes where we can see this sort of process breakdown, or at least where it can take longer than otherwise desired, shifting the focus to validation over decision making. Any other pain points as you've gone through this, kind of comparing processes that you've identified that you're hopeful this is going to help you address going forward?
Bill, do you have any? Bill's definitely more the numbers guy.
Yeah. And pain point, in the past, using the Excel model, it was hard to determine where some of those numbers were coming from. With this, we've been able, because there's note fields in all of the tables, we're able to clearly identify how that number is determined, right? Because there is lots of information that goes into the background, but this way it's all documented in the model, which has been very, very helpful. So going forward, it's consistent, right? There's not a whole lot of room for error, being that we're documenting where those numbers are coming from. We're in the Excel model, that was a little tricky. So that's been very helpful.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I'm sure the explain tool certainly helps with reconning there as well.
Yeah.
Also, because it can live much longer than our memories. So every time you go into this tool, it doesn't have to be like a new day the way it was before. Like I had to relearn how it all worked. Here, it's saved, and I can see easily like, oh, I see what I'm doing. I'm doing a debt test. So yeah, as my memory gets worse, this has been more and more helpful.
I like the way you outlined that. It lives longer than our memories, and that's just the nature of these sorts of things, right? You need to be able to understand the history and understand, where you were without having to spend a lot of time spinning your wheels to get there. Totally get it. Let's talk a little bit about alignment. So obviously, a big point of this is to help optimize alignment across various teams. Particularly, very often we talk about bridging the gap between operations and capital planning. Getting a sense of what your process is going to look like, what the roadmap will hold for you going forward. How do you envision a change or an improvement in alignment across various stakeholders internally? Do you find that this will help you bring more players to the table, maybe more defined roles? Can you speak to us a little bit about maybe internal efficiencies there that you're hoping to see?
Sure. So I haven't actually really thought of it in that way, but now that you're mentioning that, one of the things that we have like I mentioned earlier, we receive grants for the region. So we have my grants team that is fantastic, and they know what they're doing, and they're receiving all of this money that's then needing to funnel to the programs that they support. And that has always been a bit of a disconnect prior. I think we didn't fully understand, like we would just have to go to them, like going to the Oracle and being like, what is it going to be this year? And then take that away. Now they are more engaged with, we can build it to where we're asking for the same information repeatedly as opposed to our final answer. And so we've been definitely, this has helped to get the grants team and the financial strategic planning portion of our fiscal team more on board, more working together, as opposed to they were just someone we went to as this, sourced for the information. So that's one way I think that it's helped to make them, and plus, I mean, they just work well, but this definitely helps.
Yeah, you're promoting buy-in, right? And buy-in
Yeah,
leads
absolutely.
to smoother decisions. Let's call it. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. Good, wonderful. I mean, the only last question I have for both of you. Clearly, you went through this process relatively recently. We're seeing some early signs of success here, and we're kind of setting a good foundation for what planning is going to look like for the agency going forward. Taking a look back and looking for the rest of the attendees here, what advice would you give your peers in this industry who are potentially looking to go through this type of a transition, switching over to a system like this, or maybe to just more integrated, longer term financial planning where processes are going to change, roles may change, the way in which data is going to be changed? Any sort of advice or takeaways that you would leave the group with?
Bill, you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. One, you have to very strategically think of like what you're trying to get to, and what categories you want to have, right? And it's important to segment those into different tables so that you can use them in different ways. So like you'll see, we have a lot of details, from different sources, different expenditures, and they roll up here on the cash flow, but in the background, we have operating reports that will detail out, where exactly this money's coming from, or down like under fleet management, right? We have all the types of buses that we're having. So details are important. So it's just kind of important to do the planning in the beginning to map those things out in order to get those into the system.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And we were kind of fortunate in that we already had the spreadsheet that was
Yeah.
basically built into this. But I think also if you try to think of what is the problem that you're trying to solve for, and then work backwards from it for those things that you don't have, because some of that stuff we didn't have in there. We didn't have the fair recovery audits. That's only come up in the last 2 years, and that model has lived for well beyond that. So trying to think of what you're trying to solve for as you build it, I think is going to be helpful, because otherwise you can find yourself going along a little bit of a path and not ending up where you expected to go.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. Keeping the end goal in mind, right?
Mm-hmm.
If I could maybe summarize what you're both outlining here, not only from a strategic standpoint, but even from an architecture standpoint with model building in general, regardless of the medium that you use, it's important to understand what the finish line looks like. I think you both encapsulated that very well. All right, wonderful. I don't see any other questions that have come in here, and I think we've taken up more than enough of your time here. So, Juanita, Bill, thank you very much for a great presentation. Really, really appreciate it. Quite informative for me. Hope it was for everyone else as well. We will go ahead and wrap things up here for this session as we start to get into a break. Any last thoughts, Juanita and Bill, before we wrap up your session here?
No, I'm just looking forward to seeing the higher education. Just having finished the FAFSA for the first time, I kind of want to see how it hurts on the other side. So yeah, just thank you. Really appreciate it. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah,
Fair enough. All righty. Well, appreciate both of your time. Thank you very much.